If you have your Bibles with you this morning, I hope you do. We're in Proverbs 31. And as they were reading that scripture, I nudged my wife. And she doesn't like to hear me say this, but to me, she embodies the Proverbs 31 woman. And I'm blessed every day to have her in my life, and especially after as many years as it took me to find her. Julie turned around to me as she was doing the message, and she looked at me and she said, "You are so blessed." I said, "Please, she's getting harder to live with her." we were in Marshalltown on Wednesday. We went down and saw the Holocaust exhibit that was touring, and I was walking down the street, and she was next to me, and some little old guy stopped by and said, "It's so nice for this young lady taking care of her father." What can I say? Proverbs 31. Years ago, I remember listening to an interview with Billy Graham, and one of the questions that they asked him was, "What do you do for your daily devotions?" And he simply stated, "I read a chapter of Proverbs every day." And for a period of time in my life, I followed that example. And I learned two things about Proverbs that kind of stuck with me for years. Number one, a lot of the things that my parents, my grandparents, and other people told me growing up, they plagiarized from Proverbs. I remember my father looking at me as we were growing up and said, "Son, some people are going to think you're a fool. But if you keep your mouth shut, they'll never know for sure." He plagiarized it from Proverbs. I remember my grandfather. He used to say, as long as the job is honest and it provides for your family, it's a good job. Proverbs. One of my favorite storytellers, Mark Twain, he has a quote that I repeat to myself often, especially when I'm at work. And he says, "When you argue with a fool, they drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience." Again, Proverbs. But the thing that caught me the most out of Proverbs was that it is the wisdom of parents passed down from generation to generation. And whenever you read Proverbs, you'll find two statements that are repeated over and over. And he would say, "Listen to the instruction of your father. Hearken unto the teaching of your mother." Nathan asked me here a couple of weeks ago, "So what are you going to teach on?" I said, "Hearken unto my instructions, son. I'm going to tell you how to find a good woman." And that's what Proverbs 31 is all about. And when you turn to Proverbs 31, you'll find out that the beginning and the end of the chapter set a boundary for us. And it allows us to understand our study within those boundaries. This is what he says in verse 1. He says, "The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him." I remember years ago when I was at Moody, one of my professors, Dr. Louis Goldberg, and at that time he probably was one of the leading Hebrew scholars in the country, little bitty Jewish man, and he had written a commentary on Proverbs. And one of the students asked him, he said, "So who is King Lemuel?" And I remember him looking at the class and saying, "You know what, we really don't know. He's not mentioned anywhere else in Scripture. We have no historical evidence for him." He says, either we haven't found something that identifies him, or it was a pet name. It was something that his mother referred to him as, and as an affectionate type of understanding. But he said, the meaning of the name says volumes. He says in Hebrew, it means devoted unto God. So when we start this study, the first thing you need to realize that if you are looking for a Proverbs 31 woman, or if you're hoping that your wife will have the characteristics of a Proverbs 31 woman, it first and foremost starts with you as the husband. Because you are the one who's going to set the example and the standard. And then you get down to verse 10, and he makes this statement. He says, "An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels." Well, it starts out with an opening question. So why is it difficult to find a Proverbs 31 woman? Well, the easy answer is because there's not enough King Lemuels out in the world looking for them today. Because if you want to find quality, what do you have to be? You have to be quality. I remember years ago listening to a preacher preach through the Song of Solomon. And I have never had the courage in all my years of ministry to ever preach through the Song of Solomon. Someday I'm going to. And I remember him asking the question, so how do you find a good woman? Well, and he gave an easy answer. He says, you run the Christian life as hard and as fast as you possibly can. He says, and you don't look to the front, and you don't look to the back. He says, but you look to the side. And if you find a woman who's keeping up with you, then that's one that you need to consider. Because she probably has the characteristics of a Proverbs 31 woman. So if you're a young man here and you're looking towards the future saying, someday I hope I'll find this, then the first thing you have to do is become a king. And you have to run the race and be devoted unto God. If you're a husband, you say, well, how do I get these characteristics in my wife? You have to be the king Lemuel. And you have to be devoted unto God. But then he makes a second statement here. And I find it very interesting. He says, an excellent wife who can find it, she is far more precious than jewels. I have in my house right now, I have an 1894 Morgan silver dollar. And it's one of my prized possessions. And here 2 or 3 years ago, somebody said, you need to go down, you need to have that appraised. And so I took it down and I appraised it. And the guy said, well, it's between $750 and $2,500. And I said, well, how much would you give me for it? $700. No. But it's very, very special to me. And it might not be valuable money-wise, but it's precious. Because on March 4th, 1966, my mother gave birth to me. And on the day that she gave birth to me, my grandfather came up to visit her and to visit his number 8 grandchild. And as he did for all the grandchildren, gave to her a silver dollar. And it was an 1894 Morgan silver dollar. And probably out of the 9 grandchildren, probably the only one that still has this. And, through moves and everything else, it got lost. But every time I look at it, even though value-wise it's not much, but it's precious. And it reminds me of my grandfather. And my grandfather had his faults. Every man does. None of us are perfect. But I remember here a couple years ago, my mother, who was now the last living sibling, my mother and a couple of his cousins were sitting around and we were sharing memories of Grandpa. And all my memories of Grandpa are positive. I mean, if somebody asked me, could he walk on water? Definitely. I have no negative memories of this man. And my other cousin would say, we have no negative memories of this man. And all of a sudden my mom kind of chimed up and she says, well, that's not always true. And my grandfather served in World War I. And when he returned home, he had seen a lot of things that he couldn't unsee. And for a period of time, he got into a drinking problem, which my cousins are saying, we cannot believe this is, are you sure this was Grandpa? And he came home one night, and my grandmother had given birth to the oldest daughter about 6 months before. And he came home drunk for the last time. And my grandmother looked at him and said, you choose me or the drink. Because the next time you come home this way, we will not be here. And I never in my life, and my mother will contest it, never once did he take another drink of alcohol. Because he realized at that moment that he found a Proverbs 31 woman. And he realized that she was far precious than any ruby or gold or any moonshine he could get in Kingston, Arkansas. And I look back on that, and here is a man who was devoted unto God. And because he chose my grandmother over his moonshine, I'm standing here today. Because he could have made a different choice. And so when we talk about the Proverbs 31 woman, it's very important that you as a man, and me as a man, understand that that Proverbs 31 woman is going to be more evident when we treasure them like precious jewels. It's the most valuable thing that we have in our lives. And not only do we treasure them, but we treat them properly. And we let them understand how special they are. Today is, Mother's Day is a time we get a chance to, tell our wives and our mothers how special they are. But it shouldn't just be today. It should be every day of our lives. And that we're showing to them what an impact they make in their lives. I'll be very honest with you. In my lifetime, I have seen far more Proverbs 31 women in the church than I have seen King Lemuels who are devoted unto God. And the reason that men have trouble finding a Proverbs 31 woman is because they have chosen not to be a kingly woman. And so he asks that question, so where can you find one? Well, you're probably looking in the wrong places because you have chosen not to be a kingly woman. So in the rest of the chapter, he lays down these characteristics, the things that we need to be looking for in a Proverbs 31 woman. And the most important characteristics are the beginning of this, and the verses following verse 10, and at the end. Now let's turn back to the end for a minute. Verse 30. He says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but the woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Now, that one statement, if you have a pen, underline it, the fear of the Lord. So what does it mean for a woman or a man to fear the Lord? Well, first and foremost, it means that you as an individual are looking at life through God's perspective. When you see trials and hardships, when you see good times and bad times, you realize that God is still on the throne and he's still in charge. The second thing you realize is that they have an understanding of an awe of God. God, still to this day, amazes them. When they get up in the morning and they look out and they see the sunrise, he brings to them a sense of awe. When they are working around the house and they see the little children that are running around and they are in between their knees and they're about ready to knock them over, they sit back and say, at the moment I don't see it, but they are a blessing unto God. And for any of those, whose children are grown and now you have grandchildren, remember when you were raising your children, it was so hard. You just thought, you went to bed tired, you got up tired, and now when you get older, you look back and say, I really wish my kids were 4 again. And then when they get over 18, I was visiting with a lady the other day, and she looked at me and she said she's struggling with her daughter. And she said, well, my daughter's youngest son turns 18, and she's decided she no longer wants to be a mother. The kids are out of the house. And I looked at her and I laughed. I said, anybody who has kids over 18 realizes it's much harder to raise your kids over 18 than it is when they were little. But they have a sense of awe. They realize that the relationship with Jesus, the relationship with God, is far more than coming to church on Sunday. Far more than being part of the women's group. Far more than being part of the choir. It's a sense of awe. And every time you think about him, it brings peace to your life. But the last part of that, if you have the fear of the Lord, is that you see life from God's perspective. You're in awe of who he is. But the last and most important one, you understand your own personal sinfulness. Anybody who's in Sunday school class, I beat on this a lot. Because you might not realize it, but until you understand your sinfulness before God, you can't love people. It's impossible. Because by not loving people, you're saying, well, I'm better than they are. Have you seen what they've done? And this is what I've done. And when you understand your sinfulness before God, you realize that I am just a sinner. I told the Sunday school class this morning, we were talking about one of my famous statements from Bill Gaither. Bill Gaither makes a statement, he says, on the very best day when I've done everything right, I'm still a sinner, saved by God. And when you understand that, then it's easier to love other people. It's easier to overlook those things that irritate you. And people forget that. But a woman who fears the Lord, or a man who fears the Lord, will stand in awe and understand their own personal sinfulness. And of all the characteristics of a Proverbs 31 woman, this is the greatest. And it's enhanced, protected, and encouraged by a husband who's a kingly man. Now, the one thing I will give praise to Denise about, she doesn't like this. I don't care. I have the microphone and she doesn't. I tell her this all the time. The one thing that Denise has done for me is she has made me a better man. And every day when I get up, I feel like a man. And if you have a Proverbs 31 woman, they make you feel like a man. And by doing so, then you go back to the next characteristic of this. You go back to verse 11. It says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. The one thing that has always frustrated me when I was pastoring is that women who would come to me, and they always had a complaint about their husband. He didn't do this. He didn't do this. And some of them were legitimate. They just kind of got up in the morning, they got their cup of coffee, they walked out the door, and they did their job and they came home. And they forgot that their role as a husband was far greater than that. It wasn't just their responsibility to earn the money, it was their responsibility to encourage the heart of their wife. But when women would come to me and they would complain about their husbands, they put me in a very awkward position. Because the one thing I always learned in counseling is there's always two sides to a story. No matter how bad they paint it, I know it's not all true, because we have a tendency to make things up in our heads. And the trouble was, when I saw them coming, then I would look at that husband, and instead of saying, well, here comes a guy that I can shake his hand, I can enjoy it, I would always hear the things that the wife would complain about, and the things that would be criticizing about. And it's a true statement. Behind every great man is a far better woman. It's a true statement. Because great men don't become great men unless they have a Proverbs 31 woman who is encouraging them and motivating them. But it's also a two-way street. A Proverbs 31 woman will not meet her full potential unless she has a King Lemuel who's fully devoted to God in his life. And it means that he cherishes them. You might not realize this, but like I said, I've seen more Proverbs 31 than I have King Lemuel. And the church in the last 50 years has been so feminized that men no longer step up and take responsibility in their homes and in their churches. And it frustrates me. Because men, if you see the destruction of your family, it's mostly because of you, not because of your wife. And the mark of a godly man is his relationships. And if your relationship is struggling with your wife, if your relationship is struggling with other people, I guarantee you it's because you are not deciding to be a King Lemuel. It has nothing to do with your wife. But a good wife will do everything in her power to make sure that she encourages her husband. And in the flip side, a good husband is going to cherish and honor. Did you catch that? She's like fine, precious jewels. She's like rubies and diamonds, emeralds. Something that you would never, ever think about throwing away. It's even interesting because when you read through Proverbs, the writer of Proverbs will also talk about contentious women, women who gossip and cause problems. And the reason this verse is so important, because he'll make the illustration. He'll say, a contentious woman is like putting a gold ring in a sow's nose. He says it's doing nothing, but a Proverbs 31 woman is quality. So when you think about all the faults that your husband may have, find ways to encourage him and instruct him and help him. Denise and I, the one thing I've learned in 2 years with Denise is that her and I have complementary gifts. I will tell you, after 2 years of marriage, I have never, ever walked into the house and asked this question of her. Honey, what's for dinner? She hadn't cooked. She hadn't do it. She was in the kitchen last night making something for Mother's Day today, and I was terrified. I couldn't even take a nap. Nathan will text me when I'm at work. He'll say, "Help, Mom's got the skillet. She's headed towards the kitchen." All right? But let me tell you the flip side. When it comes to my investments and my money, she's the lady I talk to. When we first met, I had just a small little portfolio of some money that I'd had from a retirement plan, and I had it invested in Fidelity, and it wasn't doing anything. And so I looked at her and I said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Here's my password, here's my login, take care of it." And I'll be at work, and all of a sudden I'll get this response going, "So many shares sold today. So many shares bought today." Because you know what? That's her area. She has a gift. She has an ability. And I trust her completely to handle it. And when it comes to the kitchen, I like doing it. I like cooking. To me, it's relaxing. I like finding new things, new recipes to put together. It stresses her out. So we have developed this relationship. And we work together on it. Probably the hardest thing that I had to overcome when it came to marriage was understanding that marriage is a teamwork. And sometimes I'll get into my head and I'll think that I still have to do this all myself. If something goes wrong, it's my responsibility to fix it. And she'll constantly look at me and she says, "Relax, we're a team." And that's what marriage should be about. It should be about working together. Just because your wife might be better at you in some areas, doesn't mean it's bad. Take advantage of it. Use it. I'm better than her in something. And here's another fallacy. The thing that really frustrates me. One of the greatest lies that we've pushed on culture in the last 50 years is you can be anything you want to be. That's a lie. Here about 10, 15 years ago, I was at the Marriott Hotel in Minneapolis. And as I got onto the elevator, 2 NBA players got on with me. And they had been playing the Timberwolves. And I'm not a little guy. I mean, I'm bigger this way than I am this way, but I'm not a little guy. And these guys got on, and both these guys were over 7 feet tall. I mean, they were huge. I mean, they ducked to get into the elevator. And I remember as a kid, I was trying to palm a basketball, and I never could do it. These guys make the basketball look like a baseball. They're huge. And if I had looked at them and I said, "What is your dream? What do you really want to be?" And one of them looked at me and started crying. He says, "The only thing I've ever wanted to be is a horse jockey and win the Kentucky Derby." I don't care how much he wants to do it. He's never going to be a horse jockey. And men and women, we're not equal. No matter what culture tells you and what society tells you, we're not equal. We're equal in Christ, but we're different. That's okay. Because we each have our own different gifts, we have our own different abilities, and we both need to come to the table when it comes to a marriage and when it comes to raising our children. Because I bring things to the family and to the marriage that Denise can't bring. And she brings things to the family that I can't bring. That is the way that God designed us. But men, at times, we think the wife should be doing everything, and we don't want to do anything. And then they carry the full load, and then we wonder why they go and they lose it. Because a Proverbs 31 woman does not achieve that status unless she has a kingly mule working with her. And then you read the middle part of this chapter, you find out how great this woman is. I'm not going to hit all of it. It says, she does him good and not harm all the day of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ship of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises, and Denise does that for me. Walmart delivers our food all the time from afar. And she rises while it's yet night and provides food for her household. She considers a field and buys it with the fruit of her hands. She plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hand to the distance, and her hand holds the spindle. Do you know what this is a description of? A working woman. This is a woman who holds down a career and provides for her husband. My mother Bless her heart, she's 82 years old. She worked all her life. From the time that she graduated from high school and she retired, she held down a job. And I remember when I was younger, my dad would go to work, he'd come home, and he'd say, "What's for dinner?" And I remember my mom worked from 8 to 5, just like Dad did. Came home and made dinner. And I remember one day coming upstairs, and they were in a fight. Hard to believe, between a husband and a wife. And my wife just says, "I can't do it anymore. I can't work 40 hours a week and do everything at home at the same time." And my dad, to his credit, looked at her and said, "You're right." And to this day, my dad has been the example of what a husband and a father should be. And the one thing I do for Denise every morning when I'm home, every morning she goes and she sits in the recliner, and we have kind of a certain routine that we follow. But I get up and I make her first and second cup of coffee, and I bring it to her. My dad, in the evenings, would come home, Mom would have dinner ready, and Mom would go sit down after dinner, and Dad would clean the kitchen and put the dishes away. And my dad just turned 80 years old. Guess what he still does every morning? Same thing. And culture has told you as ladies that you need to have it all. You need to have a career, but you need to take care of your children. They don't tell that to guys. They don't tell guys, have a career and take care of your children. And this Proverbs 31 woman only takes place when she has a king leading, who is there beside her and helping her and supporting her. And even raising children. Men and women bring different gifts that we both need. Women are far softer, and children need that. You know, they need the loving arms of a mother. Even when you get old, when you're going through a rough time, even us men, who's the first person that we want to call, even if they've passed away? I want to talk to my mommy, because they're softer. But men bring something to the relationship that women can't. Sometimes children need more boundaries. And sometimes they need a harsher tone at times to get them on the straight and narrow. Now, the men can be harsh, and then the mother comes along and says, "It's okay." You know, and they wipe their eyes and they run them. That's okay. It's a balance. But ladies, the church has taught you in the last 50, 60, 70 years that you can't do both. That you can't have a job and you can't be a mother. And if you decide to become a mother, then culture tells you that you should have a job. And if you have a job, then you feel guilty that you're not taking care of your family. And none of that's true. You can do both. And you can do it effectively. But it takes one thing in particular to make it happen. And you need to have a king lead you. You need to have a man in your life who's fully devoted to God. Otherwise, this doesn't... What's interesting, too, is you notice as you read through this, it says, she does no harm to her husband. And then you get farther down in the chapter, she'll make the statement, he says, he's known in the city gates. And that's an important statement. It doesn't mean anything to us today. But remember the story of Ruth and Boaz? Probably one of the greatest romances in history. And Ruth and Naomi, they come back to Israel, and there's a famine, and Ruth goes out and she gleans from the fields of Boaz, and she proves to herself to be an honorable woman, and all of a sudden Boaz looks up and says, "That's an honorable woman." And the first thing that Boaz does is he becomes her kinsman redeemer. And the kinsman redeemer was very important. It was his responsibility to take care of Ruth and Naomi by marrying Ruth. But there was somebody else that was over him. And he had to negotiate a bride price. And he went to the city gates to negotiate that price. And in the first century, if you decided you wanted to buy or sell merchandise, if you had a cartload of tomatoes and you wanted to exchange it for 2 lambs, you went to the city gates. That's where you did business. That was the center of activity. And so when this writer of Proverbs says, does know that he's known in the city gates, basically because of her work behind the scenes and being a Proverbs 31 woman, he's able to succeed. He's able to thrive. And his reputation is intact. And he has a reputation for being honest and upright. And so, when we think about this Proverbs 31, some ladies say, there's no way I can ever be that. And I'll be honest with you, you can't be that without a king Lemuel. And men sit in there and they say, there's no way that I can be a king Lemuel. Well, without a Proverbs 31 woman, you can't be a king Lemuel. You have to have both working together. But I'll be honest with you, man, if you want a Proverbs 31 woman, it starts with being a king Lemuel. And they will come along. And you get to the last part of this chapter. And this is what it states about this woman. Verse 28. Her children rise up. Stand up, Nathan and Ethan. No. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellent, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but the woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her work praise in the gates. That is the end result for Proverbs 31. If I could give you any recommendations today as husbands for what you do for your wife today for Mother's Day, I remember I had a guy years ago, he says, well, I don't know I have to do anything for her, she's not my mother. I wanted to backhand him. Like, she just gave you 3 kids. I think she did something for you. If you want to do anything for your wife today, go home and tell her why she's excellent. Make a list. Lay it out for her. Say, you are an excellent wife because you do this, this, and this for me. You're an excellent wife because you make me a better man. You're an excellent wife because when I come home, I can help, but I don't have to put out fires. You're an excellent wife because you have chosen me. That's why it's so important. And ladies, there's great things about your husbands that you don't see. And sometimes you see them and they kind of get overwhelmed with all the negatives. And if I give you any advice, if there's things that are negative about your husband, talk about them in the bedroom. Same goes for the guy. Talk about them in the bedroom. If you don't agree on discipline in the home, back him up, back her up, then talk about it later. But don't talk about it in front of the children. And if you work together as a team, this becomes second nature to you. If you work, husbands and wives, King Lemuels, Proverbs 31 women, you are not in competition. God has put you together to work together. In fact, if we had time, I would go through Ephesians chapter 5 and tell you the importance of husbands and wives as it comes to the church and how it fits together. Because ladies, you are the church. And men, you are to treat your wives like Christ loves the church. It's so important. So my challenge to you today is, men, be a king Lemuel. Devote yourself to God. Make him your number one priority. Run the race as hard, as fast as you can. And I guarantee you, your wife will catch up with you eventually. Proverbs 31 women, if you're striving for that, realize that it starts first. Right? Don't go home, tell your friends about how bad your husband is. Don't tell your kids how bad your husband is. If you have a problem, talk to him, work it out. If you can't get help, see somebody who can help you and work it out. Because the generation it will pass down to. If my grandfather had not heeded the words of my grandmother, I wouldn't be here today. Chose to be an honorable man. And he passed on that legacy down to me. If my father had not decided that being a king Lemuel meant that he served his wife, I wouldn't have learned any of the skills that he passed on down to me. And it's a team. And if you work opposite of each other, you're not going to accomplish the goal. But if you work together, you become the kingly meal, and she becomes the Proverbs 31. Let's close it with prayer.